The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling ranch in Oklahoma as Reba McEntire sipped her coffee on the wraparound porch. At 68, the queen of country music had seen it all, sold over 75 million records, won countless awards, and touched hearts across the globe. Yet lately, she found herself searching for something deeper, something that would remind her why she fell in love with music in the first place. Her phone buzzed against the wooden table, interrupting her peaceful morning ritual. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize from Nashville. "This is Reba," she answered, her distinctive voice carrying that familiar Oklahoma warmth. "Miss McEntire, this is Margaret Henderson from the Tennessee Department of Correction. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." Reba raised an eyebrow. Prison officials didn't typically call country singers unless something was seriously wrong. "No, not at all. How can I help you?" "Well, ma'am, I'm the warden at Cedar Valley Women's Correctional Facility here in Tennessee. We have a program where we bring in performers to help with rehabilitation efforts, and your name came up specifically. One of our inmates, Sarah Mitchell, wrote you a letter months ago requesting you visit. We thought perhaps you might consider doing a small concert for our women." The request caught Reba off guard. She received thousands of fan letters, but prison requests were rare and always weighed heavily on her heart. "Tell me more about this Sarah Mitchell." "She's 28, serving a 7-year sentence for vehicular manslaughter. She was driving under the influence and killed a pedestrian. Sarah has a 4-year-old daughter she hasn't seen in over 2 years. Music has become her lifeline in here. She organizes our small choir and writes songs about hope and redemption." Reba's grip tightened on the phone. The story hit close to home. She'd lost friends to drunk drivers and had always been an advocate for responsible choices. Yet something in the warden's tone suggested there was more to Sarah's story. "What makes Sarah special?" Reba asked. "She's transformed this place, Miss McEntire. When she arrived, she was broken, suicidal even. But she found music again and started helping other women find their voices too. She talks about you constantly, says your songs saved her life during her darkest moments. The other women here, they've heard your songs echo through these halls every day for 2 years." Reba stood and walked to the edge of her porch, looking out over the rolling hills. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of cattle. This peaceful world felt a million miles from the harsh reality of a women's prison. "How many women would be there?" she asked. "About 120. We have a small auditorium that would work perfectly. Nothing fancy, just you, maybe a guitar, and women who need to remember they're still human." The simplicity of it appealed to Reba. No elaborate staging, no screaming crowds, just pure music and genuine connection. "When would you want to do this?" "Whenever works for you, ma'am. We know you're incredibly busy." Reba thought of her upcoming tour schedule, the recording sessions, the business meetings that filled her calendar. Then she thought of Sarah Mitchell and 120 women who had made mistakes and were paying for them. "Give me 2 weeks to clear my schedule. I'll come." The silence on the other end told her she'd surprised the warden. "Really? Miss McEntire, I can't tell you what this will mean to these women." "It means something to me too," Reba replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what yet. After ending the call, Reba remained on the porch, watching clouds drift across the vast Oklahoma sky. She'd performed for presidents, at the Grand Ole Opry, in sold-out stadiums across the world. But somehow, the thought of singing for women behind bars felt both terrifying and necessary. Her manager, Tom Bradley, would have concerns about security, media attention, and how this might affect her carefully crafted public image. But Reba had learned long ago that the most meaningful moments in life rarely came with guarantees or perfect timing. She pulled up Sarah Mitchell's letter on her phone. Her assistant had forwarded it months ago, and she'd saved it without really knowing why. The handwriting was neat, careful, as if each word had been considered multiple times before being written. Dear Miss McEntire, my name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm writing from Cedar Valley Women's Correctional Facility in Tennessee. I don't expect you to remember me, or even read this letter, but I needed to try. 2 years ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I got behind the wheel after drinking and killed an innocent man walking home from work. His name was David Chen, and he had a wife and 2 young children. I think about them every single day. When I first arrived here, I wanted to die. The guilt was eating me alive, and I couldn't see any reason to continue living. Then one night, another inmate was playing your song, "The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia," on a small radio, and something inside me broke open. Not in a bad way, but in a way that let the pain out. I started listening to your music every day. Is There Life Out There? Fancy. Consider Me Gone. Each song reminded me that women can overcome anything, even their own mistakes. Your voice became my therapy, my church, my reminder that redemption is possible. I know this is a huge ask, but if there's any chance you might visit us here, it would mean the world to me and the other women. We have a small choir, and we sing your songs constantly. Music is the only thing that makes us feel human in this place. I understand if this isn't possible. You've already given me so much through your music, but I had to try. With all my respect and gratitude, Sarah Mitchell. Reading the letter again, Reba felt a familiar tug in her heart. The same feeling she'd had when she first heard Patsy Cline sing, or when she'd written her first song at age 9. It was the recognition that music wasn't just entertainment. It was survival, hope, and healing all rolled into one. She called her manager. "Tom, I need you to clear my schedule in 2 weeks. I'm doing a concert at a women's prison in Tennessee." "Reba, what in the hell? Excuse my language. But what are you talking about?" She explained the call, the letter, and her decision. Tom sputtered objections about security, liability, and public relations concerns. "Tom," Reba interrupted gently, "I've been doing this for 50 years. I've sung for everyone who would listen, and plenty who wouldn't. But when was the last time I sang for someone who genuinely needed to hear music to survive another day?" The line went quiet. Tom had been with her long enough to recognize when her mind was made up. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this right. Security, proper contracts, and a small crew. And Reba? Yeah? This is why people love you. Not just your voice, but your heart." As the sun set over Oklahoma, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Reba sat at her piano and played the opening chords to "Sweet Dreams." But tonight, the song felt different, heavier with purpose, richer with meaning. In 2 weeks, she would walk into a world she'd never experienced, carrying nothing but her voice and her guitar. She had no idea that one of the women waiting for her would share a secret that would change everything she thought she knew about her own life. The drive from Nashville to Cedar Valley took Reba through rolling Tennessee hills, dotted with farms and small towns that reminded her of her Oklahoma childhood. Her tour bus, usually filled with band members and crew, carried only herself, Tom, her guitarist Jake Morrison, and a security detail that made her feel both protected and slightly ridiculous. As they approached the facility, the landscape changed. The pastoral beauty gave way to high concrete walls topped with razor wire, guard towers that seemed to pierce the gray October sky, and a parking lot filled with official vehicles. The sight made Reba's stomach tighten with nervous energy she hadn't felt since her first Grand Ole Opry performance decades ago. "Jesus," Jake muttered, staring out the window. "This place looks like something from a movie." Tom checked his phone for the 100th time. "Remember, we stick to the schedule. Setup, sound check, performance, and we're out. No interviews with local media, no photos with inmates beyond what the facility approves for their newsletter." Reba nodded absently, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Sarah Mitchell and what it must feel like to call this place home. Warden Margaret Henderson met them at the main gate, a sturdy woman in her 50s with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much, but somehow remained kind. She walked them through the security process, which involved multiple checkpoints, metal detectors, and a thorough explanation of facility rules. "The women have been preparing for weeks," Henderson explained as they walked through a series of locked doors. "Sarah Mitchell has organized a welcoming committee, and they've decorated the auditorium with hand-drawn posters. It's the most excited I've seen this place in my 20 years here." The halls they walked were long and sterile, painted in institutional green and beige. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the walls, mixing with the distant sounds of life behind bars. Muffled conversations, the clang of metal doors, and somewhere, someone singing softly. "How long has Sarah been here?" Reba asked. 2 years and 3 months. She came to us angry and broken, like most of them do. But Sarah channeled that pain into something constructive. She leads our choir, mentors new arrivals, and has completed every rehabilitation program we offer. She's become a leader among the women. They passed the common areas where women in orange uniforms sat at tables. Some reading, others playing cards, a few watching television. Many looked up as Reba walked by, their faces showing recognition followed by disbelief. Word traveled fast in a place like this. "Miss McEntire," Henderson continued, "I should prepare you for what you'll see in there. These women have made serious mistakes, but they're still mothers, daughters, sisters. Many are here for drug-related offenses, theft, fraud. Some, like Sarah, are dealing with more serious charges. But they're human beings who desperately need to remember that they matter." The auditorium was smaller than Reba had expected, with maybe 200 plastic chairs arranged in neat rows facing a small stage. Hand-drawn posters covered the walls, colorful tributes to her songs with lyrics written in careful cursive. One read "Fancy" in elaborate letters surrounded by musical notes. Another featured the opening lines to "The Night the Lights Went Out in Georgia." But it was the woman standing by the piano who caught Reba's attention immediately. Sarah Mitchell was petite, with shoulder-length brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold both deep sadness and stubborn hope. She wore the standard orange uniform, but something about her posture, straight-shouldered and dignified, set her apart. When she saw Reba, her face transformed with a smile so genuine and grateful that Reba felt tears prick her eyes. "Miss McEntire," Sarah said, approaching with obvious nervousness. "I can't believe you're actually here. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I wrote you the letter." "Call me Reba, honey," she replied, taking Sarah's hands. "Thank you for writing. Your letter touched my heart." "I wasn't sure you'd even read it," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've written so many letters that never get answered." "Who else have you written to?" Sarah looked embarrassed. "My daughter's foster family, mostly. They don't respond anymore. But that's for another time. Today is about music." Jake was setting up his equipment, and the sound of him tuning his guitar drew attention from other women who began filtering into the auditorium. They came in groups of 2 or 3, some chatting excitedly, others maintaining the guarded expression that seemed to be survival instinct in this place. Reba watched them settle into seats, noting the mix of ages. Some barely looked old enough to vote, others could have been grandmothers. What struck her most was how they looked at her, not just with the typical fan excitement, but with something deeper. Hope, maybe. Or the desperate need to believe that someone from the outside world cared about them. "Sarah," Reba said quietly, "tell me about your daughter." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Emma. She's 4 now, almost 5. She's with a foster family in Memphis. They're good people, but they think it's better if she doesn't have contact with me while I'm here. They want her to have a normal childhood. Do you have pictures?" Sarah's eyes lit up, and she pulled a worn photograph from her pocket. The little girl in the picture had Sarah's eyes and a gap-toothed grin. She was wearing a pink dress and holding a stuffed elephant. "She loves music," Sarah said. Before the accident, I used to sing her to sleep every night. Your songs, mostly." She knew all the words to "Is There Life Out There" by the time she was 3. The simple statement hit Reba like a physical blow. She thought of her own children, of the lullabies she'd sung, the bedtime stories, the everyday moments that these women had lost through their choices and circumstances. "Sarah, what happened that night?" Reba asked gently. Sarah looked around the filling auditorium, then back at Reba. "I was coming home from my ex-boyfriend's place. We'd been fighting about Emma, about money, about everything. I was angry and hurt, and I stopped at a bar. I knew I shouldn't drive, but I was so mad at the world. I thought I was fine, but I wasn't. I never saw Mr. Chen until it was too late." Her voice broke slightly on the last words. He was just walking home from his job at a restaurant. He had a daughter Emma's age. Reba saw the weight Sarah carried, the guilt that would never fully leave her. And his family? They asked for the maximum sentence. I don't blame them. In court, his wife looked at me and said, I'd stolen not just her husband, but her daughter's father, her security, everything. She was right. Other women were greeting Reba now, introducing themselves with a mixture of shyness and excitement. There was Linda Thompson, a 50-year-old grandmother serving time for embezzling from the bank where she worked to pay for her grandson's medical treatments. Maria Rodriguez was in for drug trafficking, but spent her time here learning to read and write better English. Jennifer Washington had been caught in a domestic violence situation that went wrong, and she defended herself with deadly consequences. Each story was different, but they all carried the same theme: a moment of desperation, fear, anger, or poor judgment that had cascaded into consequences none of them could have imagined. "Ladies," Sarah called out as the room filled, "can I have everyone's attention?" The chatter died down immediately. Clearly, Sarah commanded respect here. I know we're all excited about Miss McEntire's visit, but I want to make sure we remember why she's here. Music has the power to heal, to remind us who we are underneath our mistakes. Let's listen with our hearts and remember that we all deserve a second chance. The applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was heartfelt. These women weren't just clapping for entertainment. They were applauding the possibility of redemption, the reminder that they were still worthy of beauty and art and human connection. As Reba took the small stage and adjusted the microphone, she looked out at 120 women who had lost their freedom but not their humanity. She thought of Sarah's daughter, of David Chen's family, of all the ripple effects that brought everyone to this moment. "Hello, ladies," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room. "Thank you for having me. I understand that music means something special to all of you, and I promise you this: we're going to make some beautiful music together today." The cheers that erupted weren't just about country music or celebrity. They were about hope, about being seen and valued, about the possibility that even in this place, magic could happen. Reba had no idea that in less than an hour, that magic would reveal a secret that would shake her to her core. Reba's first song choice was deliberate. As Jake strummed the opening chords to "Is There Life Out There?", she watched the women's faces transform. The song, about a woman questioning whether there's more to life than her current circumstances, resonated in ways Reba had never fully appreciated until now. She married when she was 20. She thought she was ready. Now she's not sure. She wants to travel the world, see what's out there. But then she thinks about the baby. Maybe she'll wait another year. Every voice in the room joined in, and the sound was remarkable. Not polished or perfect, but pure and emotional. Sarah's voice rose above the others, clear and strong, carrying a pain that made the lyrics feel like a personal confession. When the song ended, the silence was profound. Then someone in the back called out, "Fancy!" Reba laughed. "You want fancy? All right then." This song, about a poor girl who transforms her life through determination and cunning, brought the house down. The women sang every word, some standing, others swaying in their seats. Maria Rodriguez, the woman who'd been learning to read, mouthed the words with tears streaming down her face. "This next song," Reba said, "is for every mother in this room." She began the gentle opening to "The Greatest Man I Never Knew," her tribute to complex relationships and the love that transcends understanding. But as she sang, she noticed something. In the third row, an older woman with gray hair and weathered hands was crying. Not the gentle tears she'd seen from others, but deep, body-shaking sobs. The woman looked to be in her 60s, with the kind of face that had seen hard living long before prison. Sarah noticed too, and quietly moved to sit beside the woman, offering comfort with her presence. Reba finished the song and set down her guitar. "Ma'am," she said gently to the crying woman, "are you all right?" The woman looked up, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. "I'm sorry, Miss McEntire. That song it reminds me of someone I lost a long time ago." "What's your name, honey?" "Dorothy Williams," the woman replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been in here for 4 years. Fraud charges. I was trying to keep my family together, but I lost everything anyway." "Who does the song remind you of?" Reba asked, stepping down from the stage and moving closer. Dorothy looked around at the other women, then back at Reba. "My daughter. I gave her up for adoption when she was born. I was young, unmarried, and my family threw me out. It was 1975, and things were different then. I named her Rebecca Nell before I signed the papers." The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the guards seemed to be listening intently. "I've wondered about her every day for 48 years, Dorothy continued. "I used to imagine what she'd look like, what she'd become. Sometimes I'd hear your voice on the radio and think, well, I'd think about what my Rebecca might have sounded like if she'd learned to sing." Reba felt a strange chill run down her spine. Rebecca Nell. Her full name was Reba Nell McEntire, but she'd been born Rebecca Nell McEntire. Her mother had always called her Reba for short. "Dorothy," she said carefully, "where were you living when your daughter was born?" "McAllister, Oklahoma. I was working at a diner there." Dorothy's eyes were fixed on Reba now, studying her face with growing intensity. She was born on March 28, 1955, at McAllister Regional Medical Center. The auditorium seemed to spin around Reba. March 28, 1955, was her birthday. McAllister was just an hour from where she grew up. But this couldn't be possible. She knew her adoption story. She'd been told she was adopted when she was 16, but the details had always been vague. Her adoptive mother, Jacqueline McEntire, had said the birth mother was young and couldn't care for her. What? "What did the baby look like?" Reba asked, her voice barely audible. "Red hair," Dorothy whispered. "Beautiful red hair, just like yours. And she had this tiny birthmark on her left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon." Reba's hand instinctively went to her left shoulder, where beneath her shirt lay a crescent-shaped birthmark she'd carried all her life. The room was spinning now, and she could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "Dorothy," she said, sitting down heavily in one of the plastic chairs, "I need to ask you something very important. Do you know what happened to your daughter after the adoption?" Dorothy shook her head. "It was a closed adoption. The agency said it was better that way, that I should try to forget and move on, but a mother never forgets. Never." She paused, studying Reba's face more intently. "Why are you asking me these questions?" The entire auditorium was holding its breath. Sarah had moved closer, her face showing concern for both women. Other inmates were looking back and forth between Dorothy and Reba, sensing that something profound was happening. Reba's mind was racing. The dates matched. The location matched. The physical description, the birthmark, everything aligned with what she knew about her own adoption. But the idea that she might have found her birth mother in a women's prison in Tennessee seemed impossible. "Dorothy," she said slowly, "I was adopted. I was born on March 28, 1955, in McAlester, Oklahoma. I have red hair and a crescent-shaped birthmark on my left shoulder." Dorothy's face went white. She stood up so quickly her chair fell backward, the sound echoing through the silent auditorium like a gunshot. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not. It can't be." "What was the adoption agency?" Reba asked. "Oklahoma Children's Services," Dorothy replied, her voice shaking. "They said they'd found a good family, ranchers who wanted a daughter." Reba's adoptive father, Clark McEntire, had been a cattle rancher. Her adoptive mother, Jacqueline, had desperately wanted a daughter after having 2 sons. The truth hit both women simultaneously, and Dorothy collapsed back into her chair while Reba remained frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Oh my God," Dorothy sobbed. "Oh my God, Rebecca! My baby girl! My Rebecca!" The auditorium erupted in gasps and murmurs, but Reba heard none of it. She was staring at this woman in an orange prison uniform, this stranger who carried her birth story, who had given her life, and then spent nearly 50 years wondering about her fate. Sarah was crying now too, understanding the magnitude of what they were all witnessing. Other women were wiping their eyes, some praying quietly, others simply staring in amazement at this impossible reunion. Reba stood slowly and walked to Dorothy. They looked at each other for a long moment, 2 women whose lives had intersected for only a few days at birth, and were now colliding again in the most unlikely of places. "How?" Dorothy whispered. "How is this possible?" "I don't know," Reba replied, tears streaming down her face. "I've wondered about you my whole life. I used to imagine what you looked like, why you gave me away, whether you ever thought about me." "Every day," Dorothy said fiercely. "Every single day." They embraced then, mother and daughter, amid the tears and prayers and awestruck silence of 120 women who had just witnessed a miracle they would never forget. Neither of them knew that the most difficult conversation was still to come. The warden's office had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Dorothy Williams sat across from Reba, both women still reeling from their discovery. Warden Henderson had cleared the room to give them privacy, while Tom and Jake waited outside, both struggling to understand what they'd witnessed. "I need to know," Reba said, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "I need to know why you gave me up." Dorothy looked older than her 67 years, the weight of decades carrying regret etched into every line of her face. I was 19 years old, working double shifts at the diner just to afford a room at the boarding house. Your father was—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He was married. He was a regular customer, charming. Told me he was separated from his wife. I believed him." Reba felt a familiar ache in her chest. She'd heard similar stories throughout her career, had sung songs about women who loved the wrong men and paid the price. "When I told him I was pregnant," Dorothy continued, "he got angry, said it wasn't his problem that I was trying to trap him. He stopped coming to the diner. 2 weeks later, I saw him with his wife and kids at the grocery store. His wife was pregnant too. So you were alone. Completely. My parents were religious, strict. When they found out I was pregnant without being married, my father told me I'd brought shame on the family. My mother cried for days, but she wouldn't stand up to him. They kicked me out." Dorothy's voice broke, and she took a shaky breath. "I had nowhere to go. The boarding house owner let me stay if I cleaned the building and worked extra hours at the diner, but it wasn't enough. I was barely surviving, and I knew I couldn't take care of a baby." Reba tried to imagine being 19, pregnant, and completely alone in 1955. The world had been different then. Harsher judgment for unwed mothers, fewer resources, limited options. "The adoption agency made it sound like the best thing for both of us," Dorothy said. "They said they had a wonderful family who desperately wanted a daughter, that you'd have opportunities I could never give you. They made me promise never to look for you, said it would be better for everyone if I just moved on. Did you try to keep me, even for a little while?" Dorothy nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I held you for 3 days. The nurses said it would make it harder, but I couldn't help myself. You were so beautiful, so perfect. You had this tiny cry that sounded almost musical. I used to sing to you, old country songs my grandmother taught me." The irony wasn't lost on Reba. Music had connected them even then. "I named you Rebecca Nell after my grandmother, Rebecca, and my middle name, Nell. I wanted you to carry part of our family with you, even if I couldn't." "The McEntires changed it to Reba Nell," she said quietly. "They never told me my original name. I signed the papers on your 4th day. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I thought it was right. I thought it was love." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of nearly 50 years of separation between them. "What happened after?" Reba asked. "I left Oklahoma. Couldn't bear to stay in the same state where I'd lost you. I went to Memphis, found work in a factory. I tried to forget, tried to build a new life." "Did you marry? Have other children?" Dorothy shook her head. "I was too afraid, too broken. I had relationships, but every time things got serious, I'd panic. How could I explain that I'd given away a child? How could I trust myself not to fail again?" "You've been alone all this time?" "Mostly. I had friends, jobs, a life of sorts. But there was always this hole, this missing piece. I'd see mothers with their daughters and wonder if you were happy, if you were safe, if you ever wondered about me." Reba felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for Dorothy's lonely life, anger at the circumstances that had forced such an impossible choice, and gratitude for the loving family who had raised her. "Dorothy, I had a good life. The McEntires were wonderful parents. They supported my music, encouraged my dreams, gave me everything I needed to become who I am." "I'm so glad," Dorothy said, her face lighting up for the first time. "When I realized who you were, that you'd become this successful, talented woman, it felt like a miracle, like maybe giving you up was the right choice after all." "But you ended up here," Reba said gently. "What happened?" Dorothy's expression darkened. "About 10 years ago, I was working as a bookkeeper for a small construction company in Memphis. The owner was a friend, someone I'd known for years. When his business started failing, he asked me to help him creative with the books. He said it was temporary, just until he got back on his feet. But it wasn't temporary. No, it went on for 3 years. We were taking money from clients, falsifying records, creating fake expenses. I knew it was wrong, but he convinced me we were saving the company, saving jobs. When we got caught, he blamed everything on me. Said I'd been stealing from him. Did you have a lawyer? Public defender. Nice enough kid, but overworked. The evidence looked bad because my signature was on everything. I couldn't prove that my boss had ordered me to do it without implicating myself further. Reba understood now why Dorothy was here. Why a woman who'd already lost so much had ended up losing her freedom too. "How did you find out I was your daughter?" Reba asked. Dorothy managed a small smile. "Your birthmark. When you rolled up your sleeves during fancy, I could see it. Then, when you asked about the adoption details, everything clicked. The dates, the location, your original name. I've carried this secret for 48 years. And now, here you are." A knock on the door interrupted them. Warden Henderson peered in. "I'm sorry to intrude, but visiting hours are ending soon. Miss McEntire, if you'd like to continue this conversation, we can arrange for a private visit tomorrow." So, Reba looked at Dorothy. This woman who was biologically her mother but remained a stranger. There was so much more to understand, so many years to bridge. "I'd like that," she said. "Dorothy, would you be willing to talk more tomorrow?" "I'd love nothing more," Dorothy replied. "But Reba, I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you. Finding out what became of you, seeing that you're happy and successful, that's more than I ever dared hope for." As they stood to leave, Reba impulsively hugged Dorothy again. This woman had given her life, had carried the pain of that sacrifice for nearly 5 decades, and had never stopped loving the daughter she'd never known. "Dorothy," she said softly, "I need time to process all of this, but I'm glad we found each other." "So am I, honey. So am I." As Reba left the prison that evening, her mind was spinning with questions, emotions, and a sense that her life had just taken a turn she never could have anticipated. She'd come to sing for women who needed hope, and instead, she'd found a piece of her own story she never knew was missing. The hardest part was yet to come, figuring out what this revelation meant for both of their futures. 3 months had passed since that extraordinary day at Cedar Valley Women's Correctional Facility. Reba had returned twice for private visits with Dorothy, each conversation revealing more layers of their shared story and separate journeys. The media had somehow caught wind of the connection, leading to a circus of speculation and invasive questions that Reba's team worked overtime to manage. But today was different. Today, Dorothy Williams was being released on parole. Reba stood in the parking lot of Cedar Valley, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, trying to look as uncelebrity as possible. She'd fought with Tom about being here, about the public relations nightmare this could become, about the complications of having a birth mother with a criminal record. In the end, she'd fired him and hired a new manager who understood that some things mattered more than public image. The main gate opened, and Dorothy emerged carrying a small bag containing everything she owned. She was wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 4 years. A simple blue dress and cardigan that Reba had sent ahead. At 67, she looked fragile in the morning sunlight, like someone stepping into a world that had moved on without her. Their eyes met across the parking lot, and Dorothy's face broke into the same grateful smile Reba had seen that first day. "Hello, Rebecca," Dorothy said softly as they embraced. "It's good to see you in regular clothes," Reba replied, stepping back to look at her. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified." Dorothy admitted with a shaky laugh. It's been 4 years since I've been anywhere but inside those walls. The world looks bigger somehow. Reba had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with social workers and parole officers to arrange temporary housing, job prospects, and the 100 small details that came with reintegrating into society. She'd also spent countless hours in therapy, working through her own complex feelings about finding her birth mother in prison. "I've got us a place to start," Reba said, gesturing toward her car. "There's a halfway house in Nashville that specializes in helping women transition back into society. It's clean, safe, and they have job placement programs." Dorothy nodded, but her eyes showed uncertainty. "Reba, I want you to know that I don't expect you to take care of me. I've been on my own for most of my life. I can figure this out." "I know you can," Reba replied, "but you don't have to do it alone anymore." As they drove toward Nashville, Dorothy stared out the window at a world that had changed dramatically during her incarceration. Smartphones, new buildings, different cars. The landscape of progress that had continued without her. "Sarah Mitchell sends her regards," Dorothy said suddenly. "She wanted me to tell you that the choir has grown to 30 women now. They sing 'Is There Life Out There' every Sunday, and they dedicated it to you. How is Sarah doing?" "Better. She's been accepted into a correspondence program with Tennessee State University. She's studying social work, wants to help women like us when she gets out. Her daughter, well, that's still complicated, but she's not giving up hope." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, both women processing the surreal nature of their situation. 3 months ago, they'd been strangers. Now they were navigating the complex terrain of a relationship that was part family reunion, part social work case, and part personal healing journey. "Reba," Dorothy said as they entered Nashville, "I need to tell you something I haven't been able to say before." Reba pulled into a parking lot and turned to face her. "What is it?" "I'm proud of you," Dorothy said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just because you're famous or successful, but because of who you are as a person. The way you treated those women in prison. The kindness you've shown me. I gave birth to you, but the McEntires raised you to be someone special." Reba felt tears threatening again. Over the past 3 months, she'd struggled with feelings of loyalty, loving her adoptive parents while trying to understand this woman who'd given her life. "The McEntires were good people, Dorothy, but that doesn't diminish what you did for me by choosing to give me a chance at a better life. I've carried guilt about that decision every day for 48 years, Dorothy said. But meeting you, seeing who you became, it's the first time I feel like maybe it was the right choice." The halfway house was a converted Victorian mansion in East Nashville, painted yellow with white trim, and surrounded by a garden that residents maintained as part of their therapy program. The director, Linda Patterson, was a former social worker in her 50s who specialized in helping women with criminal records rebuild their lives. "Dorothy," Linda said warmly, "welcome to Sanctuary House. We've been preparing for your arrival." As they toured the facility, Reba was impressed by the programs available. Job training, counseling, life skills classes, and a support network of women who understood the challenges of reintegration. Dorothy would have her own small room, but she'd share common areas and meals with other residents. "The most important thing," Linda explained, "is that this is temporary. Our goal is to help you become self-sufficient and independent within 6 months to a year." After Dorothy was settled in and had met her roommate, a soft-spoken woman named Grace, who was rebuilding her life after a drug conviction, Reba took her for coffee at a small cafe nearby. "This is overwhelming," Dorothy admitted, stirring sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me it's time to go back to my cell." "That's normal," Reba said. "Linda told me it takes time to adjust, You don't have to rush anything." Dorothy looked around the cafe, taking in the mix of young professionals on laptops, elderly couples reading newspapers, and college students studying. "I've missed this," she said. "Just normal life. What do you want to do first? I mean, now that you're out." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. "I want to visit David Chen's grave," she said finally. "The man Sarah killed. She told me his story, and I realized I've never properly grieved for the victims of my own crime. The construction workers who lost their jobs when the company folded, the clients who lost money. I need to find a way to make amends." Reba was struck by Dorothy's thoughtfulness, her desire to take responsibility even beyond her prison sentence. "We can arrange that. What else?" "I want to get a job. Something honest. Something that helps people. And I want to learn about you. Really learn. Not just the celebrity stuff, but who you are as a person. What makes you laugh, what scares you, how you take your coffee." "2 sugars, no cream," Reba said with a smile. "And I'd like to learn about you too. The real you, not just the mistakes that landed you in prison." Over the following weeks, they began building a careful relationship. Reba would visit twice a week, sometimes taking Dorothy to lunch, sometimes just sitting in the garden at Sanctuary House and talking. Dorothy found a job at a non-profit organization that helped formerly incarcerated women find employment. Work that was meaningful and utilized her bookkeeping skills in an ethical context. The media attention was intense but manageable. Reba gave one carefully prepared interview explaining that she'd found her birth mother and was helping her reintegrate into society. She refused to discuss Dorothy's crimes or the details of their reunion, focusing instead on the themes of forgiveness, second chances, and the power of family bonds. 6 months after Dorothy's release, they were having dinner at Reba's Nashville home. The first time Dorothy had been in a private residence that wasn't institutional. She sat in Reba's kitchen, helping prepare a simple meal of fried chicken and vegetables, marveling at the normalcy of it all. "I never imagined this," Dorothy said, watching Reba move around her own kitchen with practiced ease. "When I was in prison, I used to dream about what your life might be like. I pictured you in a mansion somewhere, surrounded by fancy things and important people." "Well, this is a pretty nice house," Reba said with a laugh. "But it's still just a home, and the most important people in my life are usually sitting around this kitchen table." "Including me?" Dorothy asked tentatively. Reba stopped what she was doing and looked at her birth mother. This woman who'd given her life, lost her for nearly 50 years, and was now slowly becoming a part of her world again. "Including you," she said firmly. After dinner, they sat on Reba's back porch, looking out over the hills surrounding Nashville. Dorothy had brought her guitar, an old acoustic she'd bought with her first paycheck from the nonprofit. "I never told you," Dorothy said, tuning the instrument with surprising skill. "I used to play and sing before I got pregnant with you. I dreamed of being a country singer, actually." "Really? You never mentioned that. It seemed too, I don't know, presumptuous? Like I was trying to take credit for your talent." "Play something," Reba encouraged. Dorothy strummed a few chords, then began singing "Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain" in a voice that was weathered by age and hardship, but still carried a haunting beauty. When she finished, Reba was quiet for a long moment. "You're good," she said finally. "Really good. I can hear where some of my musical instincts came from. Music was the one thing that got me through prison," Dorothy said. "That, and thinking about you. Sarah taught me some of your songs, and singing them made me feel connected to you somehow." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over Nashville. 2 women who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and were slowly learning to be family.
"Dorothy," Reba said suddenly, "I want to ask you something.
and I want you to be honest. Of course. Do you regret giving me up for adoption? Dorothy considered the question seriously. I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. I regret not being strong enough or smart enough to find another way. But do I regret that you grew up with the McEntires? That you had opportunities and love and support that helped you become who you are? No, I can't regret that. I'm glad, Reba said, because I've been wondering if you felt like you missed out on raising me. I did miss out, Dorothy said simply. I missed your first words, your first steps, teaching you to drive, watching you fall in love, being there when you needed your mother. I'll always grieve those lost years, but seeing who you became, knowing that my sacrifice gave you the chance to touch so many lives with your music, it makes the pain bearable. A year later, Dorothy Williams had her own small apartment in East Nashville, a steady job she loved, and a relationship with her birth daughter that continued to grow and deepen. She'd also maintained contact with several women from Cedar Valley, including Sarah Mitchell, who had been released and was working toward a social work degree while slowly rebuilding her relationship with her young daughter. The story had taken on a life of its own in country music circles and beyond, not as a sensational tale of celebrity scandal, but as a testament to the power of forgiveness, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds between mothers and daughters. Reba had written a new song about the experience called Never Too Late, which became one of her most requested numbers. She'd also established a foundation to help women transitioning out of the prison system, with Dorothy serving as one of the program directors. On the anniversary of their reunion, Reba returned to Cedar Valley Women's Correctional Facility for another concert. This time, Dorothy came with her, not as an inmate, but as a volunteer and advocate. Sarah Mitchell had organized the event, and the auditorium was packed with women who'd heard the story and wanted to see the miracle for themselves. "Ladies," Reba said from the small stage, "I want you to meet someone special. This is Dorothy Williams, and she's my birth mother. A year ago, she was sitting where you are now. Today, she's living proof that your story doesn't end with your mistakes." The applause was thunderous, but Dorothy stepped forward with the same dignity she'd shown that first day. "I want to tell you something," she said to the women. "I spent 4 years in this place thinking my life was over, that I'd lost everything that mattered. But sometimes, losing everything is what it takes to find what you were really looking for all along." She gestured to Reba. "I found my daughter in the last place I expected to find hope. But more than that, I found myself, the person I was meant to be, the mother I should have been all along." As Reba and Dorothy sang together, a duet of amazing grace that brought the entire auditorium to tears, the women of Cedar Valley saw something they desperately needed to see: proof that redemption was possible, that love could triumph over circumstances, and that even the most broken stories could have beautiful endings. Sarah Mitchell, now serving as the prison's volunteer coordinator while finishing her sentence, watched from the wings with tears streaming down her face. She'd been the bridge that brought Reba to Cedar Valley, never knowing she was orchestrating one of the most extraordinary reunions in country music history. After the concert, as they prepared to leave, Dorothy took one last look around the auditorium, where her life had changed forever. "Ready to go home?" Reba asked. Dorothy smiled, linking her arm through her daughter's. "I've been ready for 48 years." As they walked out of Cedar Valley together, free, forgiven, and finally family, both women knew that the most beautiful songs are often born from the deepest pain, and that sometimes the most unlikely places become the stages for life's greatest miracles. The story of Reba McEntire and Dorothy Williams became more than just a tale of celebrity and coincidence. It became a reminder that love transcends time, circumstances, and even the walls that separate us from each other. And for 120 women still waiting behind those walls, it became proof that no matter how dark their current chapter, their story was far from over. In the end, music had done exactly what Dorothy had hoped it would do. That first day she heard Reba's voice on a crackling prison radio. It had brought them home to each other.